Good evening. I do believe that your first 10 minutes of class can make or break your lesson. Now, some of you say, well, that's true. Some of you may say, well, I don't quite believe that. But let's see if I can give you an example. If you watch a movie, you talk to a friend on the phone, if you are going for an outing, try to remember how much the first 10 minutes are important for you. Sometimes if you watch a movie, the first 10 minutes may be enough for you to decide, okay, I no longer want to finish that movie. If you talk to a friend on the phone, after 5, 6 minutes, for some, conversation is over, even though you could talk for hours on the phone. If you watch a movie, you could. I remember watching The Lord of the Rings, 3 hour movies. I don't mind watching that, even though the first 10 minutes was important for me to get involved with the movie. What is the other example I had? Um, I had a third example earlier and I forgot. Anyway, it does not matter. I do believe that the first 10 minutes is important. So I'm going to give you some tricks tonight's podcast about how I set up my classes and how I hope you will understand how they're good ideas. I've been doing those tips for the last maybe, let's say, 3 or 4 years since after COVID. And I had started before COVID, and it works beautifully. If you don't know me, my name is Alain Faber, and I've been a teacher for more than 25 years. And on this channel, I share my ideas, share my experiences, answer questions, and talk about education. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to put your comments in the comments below. Anyway, so today's topic or today's podcast will contain three topics. The first one is to design engaging hooks that capture students' attention to start with in a class. Second, establishing efficient start of class routines. And the other one is to use formative assessments during lessons. So at the beginning of the lessons and throughout. Now, I have to tell you that I teach science this semester, and I taught science for grade 9 students. So they're about 14, 15 years old. And for me, I found that if students are aware of what's happening in the first 10 minutes of class, if I catch their attention, the rest of the class is so much easier. And I have to, just so that you know, my classes are 75 minutes long. So let's go for the first one, which is designing engaging hooks that captures students' attention. So usually what I do when I start the class, I always put on the board the list of the agenda for the day. I realize that students like it because they see what we're going to do. I also need to put the agenda on the board. And the key reason is that once I write down the agenda on the board, I start focusing on what I will do in my classes. And I forget and I leave outside the classroom everything else that relates to work, personal life, and so on. So I can focus 100% in my students. Now, what that does is that I can focus on what's important, and then my students also see what we will be doing. So when I start class for the first 30 seconds, that's what I do. I say good morning or good afternoon to the students. I realize that they need to know that we see them as humans too, as people. When they came in class, I said hi, was close to the door. We have chit chats. It's important. But they also see what we will be doing in class. And what's important is that whatever you have on the board in your agenda, you have to do that. So that students say, okay, this is the plan, this is what the teacher has planned for us, and this is what are the expectations for this class. And it brings everybody's responsibility at the forefront, and it's beautiful. So that's the first thing. Next thing I do often is I have something where students will be able to do something with their hands. I know it's high school, but how can I find something for them? So we are on day 3. So on the first day I had post-its where I asked them about one of their interests. So when they came in, there was post-its. They started doodling on them. Then I told them what I wanted to do. So during the attendance, what I did is I asked their name. I also mentioned to them that I wanted them to correct me if I had mispronounced the name. And then they told me what was one of their interests. So in many ways, it's in an interesting way, it started a conversation right away at the beginning. And the next one here that I did, what was it? That was yesterday. Yesterday I had what we called, let's see, um, craft sticks. We used to call them pipe cleaners. And I gave two to each of my students. And I had asked them to do 2 or 3D model of a topic of science that they found interesting. So they came in and they had something to do with their hands. And what was interesting, my first period did great, but they had no models. My second and third periods were they were so happy that period one had given them examples. And then what happened is that we started the class, even though it was a few minutes, where they had something in their hands, something to do. So it's interesting because you see that in business sometimes. If someone feel that you give them something, they're much more willing to be there for you as well. So it works in sales. That's something I enjoy as well learning, and it's something that works as well in a classroom. Because the reason is, if you keep in mind that students come to your class, they've seen tons of teachers before, why would they listen to you? So if you show them that they're important for you, they will show you that they find that you're important for them as well. So that's important. Today we did a lab with metal density, and therefore we did a hands-on activity, which was important because they had a chance to uh, to to um, to measure masses and volume. We used the Archimedes principle to use water displacement for the volume, and then an electronic scale. And it was an easy, first of all, it was an easy lab. But what happened here is that, first of all, it allowed me to say, okay, that's something that many of them had done before. Many of them had not used electronic scales before, so that was interesting, so they were able to do so. We use overflow cans and graduated cylinders to find volumes. There was water everywhere. We cleaned up the water to make sure things were good, but people were engaged in what we were doing, and they had fun. And guess what? At the end of all the labs, everybody had to clean their stations, and we were ready to discuss our findings. So that was good. And the other thing that they liked is that instead of me asking one person or a group of people to do everything about data collection for their team, we each did a few samples, and therefore collectively we put all the data together. So I like to call it collective science or citizen science. And what happened is that we had at the end a table of values full of data. And guess what? Everybody participated in that. And it's something that is amazing. It's so much better for people to say, okay, I participated, I did that. So much better than having teachers handing things to them. But that's my perspective. Now, I do agree that it would be so much easier for me to show them the sample of metals, give them the data for us to analyze. But it's so much fun to realize that you can do activities, you can be messy, but in science, there's nothing perfect. And like any skills as an athlete or a musician, the more you do an activity, the better you get. So for many of them, I asked them to do a minimum of one sample. And I say, if you do one, then you can do a second, then you do a third. And I gave them 20 minutes to do this, tons of times. The first sample with a mass and a volume took about 10 minutes for the first one. And then after that, within 5 minutes, they had data coming. So that was very good. So what's important with that one is that they can use what they knew from before, what we're doing right now, and then the lessons that I will do tomorrow and Friday will be based on what we did today. So that means that instead of me guiding all the lessons, students have participated and we are creating the lessons together. And that is quite amazing. Is it unnerving sometimes? Because I cannot plan and prepare exactly what will happen. We have data, we will do graphing, and we'll see what happens. But what's interesting is that we will learn together, and then surprises will come up as we go along. I think it's important for students, but also for teachers. And that brings, see if I did not mention that one too. Oh yes, to add, one thing that I realize, especially nowadays with the screen, with the social medias, students are spending, and teachers too, are spending a lot of time as a follower, as a content consumer. And what happens is that it's very much harder to be curious because social medias are feeding you as a follower all the information. You don't have to think about where it's from. You don't have to think about what it is. It's just coming to you. And I find it's very hard lately, over the last couple of years, to bring up the curiosity of students in a classroom. So finding hands-on activity right away, I think it's a beauty. Now, depending on how you teach, teachers sometimes they say, okay, let's see, we have a lesson, we're going to do the theory. Once we have the theory, we'll understand it, we'll do activities and answer questions. And once it is done, then we'll do a lab. And I like to change things the other way around, because once we have a chance for students to do a lab, even though they don't know all of the theory, I have them to notice different things. They become curious, they see new phenomena. So what happens is when I do my lesson, then it's not just me talking. I have a chance to tell them the information. I have a chance to remind them what we have done. When we do activities like this, I take pictures of their setup and I post it, and therefore their activities are being part of what we're doing. And I think that brings up curiosity. And when curiosity is there, I think it's so much more fun for the students, but also for teachers. That's how it goes. But I know that for some, simulations on computers are much easier because it's so much less prep. But as a science teacher, I do love hands-on activity, and that's why I do that. Let's go for the second part of this podcast, and we'll talk about establishing efficient start of class routine. So the first one is the idea that we have an agenda. I mentioned that earlier. The second point is, what do I do within the class setting? So usually I always divide my class in two parts. We have the intro, we chat, we have the beginning of the activity. Then we have about 35 to 40 minutes of focused activity. It's either a hands-on activity where we collect data. It could be a lesson that I gave. It could be a video with questions. The idea here is that we have 35 to 40 minutes to focus on what we want to do. And right after that, I give them 5-minute breaks. Now you're going to say, well, 5-minute breaks is a long time in a class when it's unstructured. And what do students do during that time? What if they go on their phones? What if they start acting out? Well, these are all relevant concerns. But what I realized over the years is that when I put on the agenda that there's a break midway, students know that, okay, I need to focus for 35, 40 minutes, and then I know a break is coming. So sometimes if they don't feel like working too much, they say, well, let's see if I can be more involved, knowing that I'll have a break. During that break, a lot of things is going on. First of all, people go to the washroom, and therefore they're not stopping the class to go there. It may have happened to you when you do an activity and then you ask for clarification questions, and then someone raised their hands and they say, can I go to the washroom? So that means they haven't listened to you for the last 5 minutes before that question. Now, the next thing that is interesting in the 5 minutes, some of them will take their phones out to catch up on social media. Sometimes people like to play those mobile games that last 3 minutes, and other people would just chat with each other. Conversation about the plans for after school, what happened before. Sometimes people talk about science, what we had just done. Some people come to me to ask questions. Also, what are the other things I've seen before? They work on other classes, math classes, in other social sciences. So what happens is it's always something that is constructive, or that I find constructive. Because if you're teaching nowadays, you know that if you tell your students, okay, we're going to do an activity and all the phones are off, you can't touch any electronics, there's a feel of, I do feel there's a tension that goes up where students says, well, I haven't looked at my phone for a while, and then you can feel the edginess happening in the classroom. And as soon as you give them some time to go on their phone, just for them to touch them, turn it on, check a few things, all the tension goes down in the classroom. And then we are ready to go again. Now, by that time, about 45 minutes of the class has happened, and therefore there's about 30 minutes left in the class. So what do I do with the last 30 minutes? So there's a few things here. Either we are expanding on the first part of the lesson, or we can do personal work time when they have to read something or they have to analyze information that we've worked before. So what happens is we could be group work, as a whole group. Sometimes I get whiteboards and I put them on the lab stations with markers. I ask them specific questions. It could be reviews, it could be their input. So what happened here, it's a change on what we are doing. So if it happens that the first half is more where students are sitting, the second half, students are moving more around. If in the beginning of the class we have a lab and people are moving around, the second half, people are a bit more quiet. So during the time, people have a chance. I say here people, so this my students have the chance to move around a little bit, and then movement becomes part of learning. And I think it's important here. And that brings us this one, the topics and times for break. And usually by the time we finish the class, we have concluding statements. And what's interesting here is that by students knowing what we're doing, knowing that there are times for breaks, I tell them that there's always room for questions they have. And there's communications happening all the time. When I share information, they share information to me, they ask questions, and then that makes the classroom so much more satisfying for me, but also for them. That's what I'm striving for. Now, I have to say that my lessons are not always fantastic. Every so often we do things and I say, well, it could have been better. I remember during semester one, there was one of the class where I started my class, and 5 minutes in, I just asked my students, well, do you feel that my lesson is boring? And then they look at me, they were not sure. So, well, I find whatever I'm doing is quite boring for me. And then they look at me and they say, oh yes, sir, it's very boring. So I said, okay, take 3-minute break. I rebooted my brain. We did a timeout. And then I started again, changing how we were doing, and things were much better. So students appreciated the fact that, okay, Mr. Faber realizes that sometimes if it's not exciting, we can reboot and start again. Just keep in mind that science is never something that is perfect all the time, the first time. So if these students see you that you try and you succeed, and you try and you fail, but then from failing, you learn and you move forward, I think these are great skills for them. Very nice. Let's see if we can look at the third topic I want to share with you today, which is using formative assessment during lessons and during lessons opening. So my point here are the following. So is to use students' experiences. Very nice. So I haven't done it yet because we're doing chemistry and we're inside and it's about -10 outside, -10 degrees Celsius. So we stay inside. But as soon as it gets better and we have a unit on sustainable ecosystems, what I do is I often give as homework to go for hikes to explore, appreciate nature, and I ask them to take pictures of their neighborhood, pictures of something they've noticed in their environment, in ecosystems, something they've noticed that was interesting. And what I do is that we have a collective Google presentation where some of you may have PowerPoints. It depends on what you like. And then I make it open for everybody. And then they can add their pictures. And if I have 1 or 2 guiding questions, they include their pictures and they answer the guiding questions with their pictures. So what's interesting with that is that there are activities they've done the day before, following what we have done, so it's part of the topic. And students always like to do that because sometimes we can take 10 minutes to put the pictures together. Sometimes if I don't want to take the time at the beginning of class just to work on computers, I can use the last 10 minutes of class to tell students, okay, put the pictures on the presentation, because tomorrow the first thing we'll do is look at your pictures. And what I do, I go to the class, and each of them, they could be by themselves or in pairs, so for people to feel comfortable. And then they present the information to the class. They don't have to come to the front. They can just be at their seat, walking around at the back, and they say, okay, this is the picture I took. These are the answers to the guiding questions. So what happens here is that students create content in the class. They bring in a picture, they bring their ideas and their perspective. And you know what? Often it is so much more interesting than me trying to give all of the information to them. And on top of that, I learn from them, because their perspective is different than my perspective, especially if it's something that I have not thought of. So they share the pictures, they share what they think of the pictures and what they've learned from it. And at the same time, everybody also appreciates that. And I think this is something that can be done in the first 10 minutes. It's beautiful. Another one we can do is the hands-on object, as I mentioned. So I have all kind of knickknacks that I have in my class. So for example, when we have electricity, I went to Home Depot. That was the case, and not to mention any names. And I went to Home Depot, went to the electrical department, and purchased a foot long of different kinds of wires. I bought some sockets that we plug in the wall, switches. There's some different bulbs. I've also, what do I have here? Breakers. So what happens is when we have the electricity unit, I share with them things that I found at the hardware store. That's the word I was looking for. So they see the objects. I have them from the hardware store. I explain their purpose, or I can give that to them and ask them, okay, if I have 3 or 4 different kinds of wire, why are they different? If I have, what else I have here? I have a solar panel. And when we do a solar panel, we looked at the angle of the sun and how the voltage change. So here what happens, I look at materials that I have at home that the students would have at their home, or that they've seen at a store or on TV. And then I give them a chance to play with their hands so that we can actually do something. And what happens is the best way for them to become curious. Now some of you will say, well, this is a bit childish. Why would students, they're 15, 14, 15, why would they need objects to play and share and give to each other? Well, the reason here is, in many ways, I like to be able to touch something and be able to say, okay, this is wire. There's so much copper in a wire, for example. Here's a solar panel. When I hide a part of it, this is what happened. For me, it's interesting because it keeps my curiosity alive. And I know that it brings curiosity alive for students as well. Because the key reasons, the title of this show here today is the first 10 minutes of class can make or break your lesson. The whole idea here is that how can you keep people interested for 75 minutes? Well, I'm not an entertainer. It's very hard for me to be in front and just entertain for 75 minutes teenagers. Now, they have access to a phone all the time. That means that there are professional entertainers entertaining them all the time. I cannot compete with that. However, I can certainly bring up their curiosity. Therefore, it becomes an intrinsic value. They become curious about what we're doing, and then the energy comes from them. So that there's a communication, there's an energy exchange in the class, and I think that's just the way to go. So that is my perspective on this one. Now, is it easy to bring up curiosity all the time? No, not necessarily. But as we go along, we're on day 3 in our semester, bringing ideas to the class, hands-on activities, giving them a chance to ask questions. I think that slowly I'm getting to a situation where they will be more and more interesting, more and more interested, and at the same time, it will make me in the classroom more and more interesting and more interested in the classroom. So these are topics I wanted to share today. with this idea that if you start well your class, then it's so much easier to continue. And I was thinking as I was sharing with you, I should do a checklist of what I do in the classroom and see if I can share it with you. Let's see if I can work on that in the days to come or the weeks to come. On this, have an amazing day. If you're a student, have an amazing semester, learn well. If you're a teacher, have an amazing class tomorrow. And I will see you next Wednesday for the next podcast. On this, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. There we go. And I wish you a great week.